Welcome to this session, everyone. Glad that you could make it. I know, and I apologize for how convoluted maybe getting here might have been. I think most of you had to walk to every session before you could find this particular one, this particular room. But thank you for your persistence that you could be here. We'll have a very important conversation, and I want to get right into it. And thankfully, we have an esteemed panel that will enable us to unpack the question that is in front of us. We have been discussing about the opportunity for green industrialization in the context of Africa, and we want to look at the trade and policy implications of this. From Africa Climate Summit in September, which was hosted in Nairobi, all the way now to the COP, I'm sure you've heard of the term climate positive growth. Climate positive growth essentially being a model that is being adopted as a way for Africa's green development, but also relevant for global decarbonization, and how then we can be able to translate that in the form of national and international policy, trade rules, but also investment approaches. So we'll be having a conversation just to look at how will these pieces enable us to realize this vision in a kind of a systemic and integrated way, so that even as we continue with the conversation, as we continue shifting the narrative in the context of Africa being a solution provider, in the context of the opportunity that Africa provides in this space, that we also start realizing some traction within the countries that, within the 54 or 55 countries that obviously are forward-leaning in terms of adoption of this approach. So I want to, without further ado, invite my panelists and ask them to come and take a seat. I want to start off with Mr. Ali Mohammed, the Special Climate Envoy for climate change for the President of Kenya. A round of applause for Banali. I'll call up Wanjira Madai, the Managing Director for Africa and Global Partnership at WRI as well, to take a seat. Then Timothy Aful Kumson, the Regional Director for GFunds. Also, if you could come up. And then I'll also invite Kala Inuen, the co-founder of the Climate Action Platform for Africa. We likely might be joined by one more panelist in the course of this conversation, Jean-Yves Remy, the co-lead of the Remaking Global Trade, also the director of the Sridhar Rampal Center for International Trade, Law and Policy. So, but she'll be coming in later. So, Banali, I want to start out with you. And obviously, Kenya has been at the forefront in leading the charge, and through President Ruto, in terms of green industrialization and the opportunity that presents for the African countries. There was a launch of the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative. There has been conversations within Kenya of what this potentially means, how Kenya can be able to be a climate powerhouse, a green industrialization powerhouse. Could you speak a little bit on how is Kenya exploring the different policies that will enable the realization of this vision, the various pieces within the country that enable that this can then translate into the tangible impact that we expect it to have?
Well, thank you very much, Jack, and good morning all. Let me begin first of all by thanking CAP-A for hosting us, and also the B team, who have been a great partner for Kenya and indeed for Africa in our journey towards climate action. Last September, for 3 days, 4 to 6, we hosted the inaugural Africa Climate Summit, which President William Ruto co-hosted with the Africa Union Commission. It was a well-attended summit. And the whole ambition was really to transform, to shift the narrative of our continent from being a continent that is waiting for aid, for help, and present the opportunities, the potential, and the resources that our continent has. And to a large extent, we did achieve. We came out with a very ambitious declaration that was endorsed by the entire continent that sets our agenda, not just for this COP, but really going forward in our developmental ambitions. The message coming from the African leadership, chaired by Mr. President William Ruto, is indeed we are victims. That's true. Indeed, we have contributed minimally to this whole challenge that we are all facing as a global community. But that is not really the main subject of Africa anymore. Africa is saying we want to become part of solutions. And Kenya is leading from the front and saying the solutions are available. There are certain issues that need to help us to be unlocked in order for those solutions to help Africa and to help the global community. And these are the things that we are talking about here and in other forums, especially the whole issue of financial reform agenda. And that is a big subject for Kenya. We are trying to push the whole issue of the unfairness and equitous systems that continue to push us down and do not allow us to access the available financing. You know, we go to every other meeting. We are bombarded with the reality that there is so much money, rather. I just came from a session, a bilateral session, and I was told there is $270 trillion in the world to be accessed. And how much does Africa access? 32 billion out of 270. That is 0.01% of the available financing. You go to energy. President Ruto has spoken about it every other time. The investment in energy over the last decade was, what, $3 trillion. How much did Africa get? 2%. Yeah, 60 billion. And so forth. So this is the issue that really, unless we really tackle the elephant in the room, which is the financial systems of the world that continue to inhibit the access and the utilization of the enormous renewable resources, the enormous capacities that the continent of Africa has, we will not be able to address this challenge that we are all facing. So here in this summit, in the last 3 days, President Ruto and his peers, African group, together with the COP presidency, we hosted what we are calling Africa Green Industrialization and Investment Initiative, which was really well attended. We had I think 7 heads of state from our continent, from east, west, north, south. The messaging that we put forward together with the COP president was exactly what I'm saying. And we are ready. We have the incentives. We have all the regulations that are required to attract investment into our continent, and we're inviting investors to come. We are ready, of course, to meet everybody halfway. It's not about favors, as my president keeps on saying. It's not about favors. Africa does not need favors. Africa needs fairness. And so that is the messaging that we are putting across to the whole world. Renewable energies, I'm sure you've heard it many times about the potential of renewable energies in the continent. 40%, 50% of the total renewable energy potential of the world. In our country, in Kenya, we are 92%. We have the ambition to become 100% in 7 years. And we've lined up a number of investments to achieve that. Indeed, we will achieve, because it's a political commitment. It is also it's feasible because of the economies, and the president of the country is very committed to it. So we are ready. We're putting in place the regulations, talking about the sequestration and carbon, the whole issue of carbon management and carbon sequestration. Again, we are putting together all the regulations on of carbon markets. We didn't have that. I don't think most of the countries in the world didn't have. So we are putting together necessary regulations and legislations to attract investments. Kenya, we are also making step forward. We are going to this whole issue of carbon management. The carbon CDR, as called carbon dioxide removal. It is a matter that is not, of course, in the main discussion rooms, but it's something that we as Kenya think it is possible, and there are a number of startups in our country. We are supporting them from policy perspectives. We want to see how dark direct air capture and carbon removal is going to help. We have the ambition to tap into the resources that have been announced by other parts of the world. And we want to experiment and see these technologies that are being pushed around the world also. So we are putting together the regulations, we have the political will, and we have the ambition as Africa and as Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Envoy Ali, and it's quite encouraging to hear, a lot of the proactive steps that Kenya already is taking itself from a national standpoint. And I take your point. It's not about favors. It's about fairness. Now, to achieve fairness, there's a level of engagement on a global stage that is needed, which is part of what is happening at COP, is part of what is happening here. You talked about the finance, the global financial architecture, cost of capital that will be able to unlock this opportunity. And Caroline, I want to come to you in thinking through how do African countries, how do we engage with global actors, especially those that have sent the signals in a way that is, supportive of this endeavor? How do we engage from a trade, from a policy, to enable that the fairness that is needed can be achieved, and with some of the development of the rules, the trade rules and policies, that those can be done in a way that obviously does not erode this competitiveness that Africa has?
Thank you, Jack. Is it on now? Yes, now it's on. And thank you so much for that stage setting, Ali. You spoke about an elephant in the room. I'd say there's a small little herd of two elephants in the room. Right? The one is the lack of access to investment capital at the right price and the right amount. The other is the lack of fair and equitable access to markets. And they are very, very intertwined. I won't milk that metaphor. I won't make them related to each other, these two elephants. But those two topics are very, very connected. Yes, a lot of the demand for products will, to some degree, come from African countries and Africa's rapidly growing own consumptive demand. At the same time, a lot of the markets that African products are going to sell into, and particularly the markets that Africa's climate performance in form of carbon credits will sell into, will be markets outside of the African continent. The European Union has really, really ambitious targets around greening its industry, around reducing the embedded carbon in their products, and they have all sorts of rules around that. Africa has the potential to be a massive provider of goods and services into those markets that are wanting to decarbonize their own consumption patterns. Yet the way that the carbon regulations and the trade regulations are defined may not actually be very conducive to enabling that trade. And here it becomes quite technical, and unfortunately people tend to glaze over when I talk about that. But as I said on another discussion yesterday, we have to be both technical and tenacious on this, because the devil is in the detail in how some of these things are defined. At Trade Day today, there's lots of conversations around CBAM, the European Union Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which many actors in Africa are a bit nervous about. Because when it first came out, people were very worried about the impact it would have on existing export streams. But it's very important that African countries and European counterparts realize that that demand for low embedded carbon products and services will be a tremendous pool for the investment and the building of industrial capacity on the African continent. And it can really link to that desire to make the investment capital available, because one of the reasons why the cost of capital is so high is because there isn't really a clear demand for products and services, and where that demand exists, it may not be available in foreign currency. So investors are really happy if they actually see offtake contracts that are denominated in euros or dollars, because that takes a currency risk away. They're really happy if that investment or that offtake, that demand, is backed by very clear policy and regulation in the markets that you're serving, because that makes it clear that demand for a green steel, green cement, green aluminum is not going to go away. It's not a fad because the consumers are interested. It's embedded in the European regulation. So it's absolutely crucial that African policymakers get a voice at the table as the details of those policies and regulations are defined. In its inception, CBAM and CBAM-like regulations can be really powerful. But if the way that exactly the embedded carbon is measured, the systems that are being used, the sequencing of who has to pay when, how you prove how much embedded carbon you have, if all of that is done in a way that makes it really hard for African players to prove their low carbon embeddedness, they will be locked out of those markets. So very important encouragement for both African policymakers as well as Europeans and others that are going to follow similar paths. If you want to take advantage of the opportunity that Africa has to offer, and you would be planetarily stupid not to do so, then you have to have them at the table as you design the details of these regulations. Because otherwise they will not be designed in a way that allows you to take advantage of these opportunities.
I'll pick up from where you left off, Carla, in Wanjira. I want to come to you. That, there is a massive undertaking required in realizing the kind of ambition that we have set ahead of ourselves, both nationally and internationally. And there's something to be said of what global partnerships can be able to bring to the table and allow that we're not just walking alone. We can be able to leverage on our respective strengths. And WRI, the organization that you're leading on the continent, has been at the forefront of forging a lot of these partnerships. Speak to what global partnerships, the role they have and they can play in enabling the realization to make this real, to make this achievable.
Thanks. I think
It's working.
is it on? What's wonderful is the conversation on trade and on a lot of the discussions around green industrialization often starts from the products. The assumption underlying that is the product exists and that the product has come to a very clear marketplace. So all this action is quite local, and we need to ensure that those products, and so the real conversation is in the product backwards. Who is producing? What is the fairness in the flow of benefits from that production? What are the policies that incentivize the production of actually compliant products? What is the role of some of the even offsetting or the offset discussion for local decarbonization, so that if CBAM and those discussions are being had, our products meet that border already net zero? So there's a fantastic discussion to be had. Take agriculture, for example. We know that 90% of farmland is smallholder. Almost 80% of the food produced around the world is produced by smallholder farmers, mainly women. And a lot of that, we have the hungriest and the poorest are the very same women who hold the food basket. We have to address the equity across that production cycle, so that as food, for example, moves up that chain and to a marketplace, and we have to also discuss the organized and the organization of a marketplace, that entire system is part of getting us ready for a global partnership. A lot of times the exclusion, on top of the reasons that have been mentioned by Colin, is internal, it's local. How we work with government, how we ensure that the marketplace is clear, how we ensure that equity is in those products. We know that demand, it's in a carbon-constrained world, we are going to see a demand for green products. So internally, our policies need to be incentivizing that sort of production. And then, of course, I'll stop there for now.
Okay. No, I think inclusiveness and equitable partnerships, that even as we make this transition, we are also not continuing with the business as usual. We're having a paradigm shift in how we even forge these partnerships, which is a departure from how it's been done in the past. So this opportunity is a pivot point in all manner of places, just to provide that kind of opportunity that we can also walk away from some of the social ills that have bedeviled us. Welcome very much, Dr. Jan, Yves, Remy. Welcome to the panel. I'll give you some time to settle down and catch up. So Tim, I want to come to you because you're leading the G-Funds Africa. G-Funds represents obviously a coalition of leading financial institutions that are looking to accelerate our achievement of getting to net zero. You also wear different hats, having worked for a multilateral development financial institution in AFDB. I want to put you on the spot from an investor standpoint. If you could speak to, what do investors need to see? What are they looking for them to engage, to help in unlocking the kind of capitals that we need to see for this opportunity to be real?
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Jack. And thank you, CAPE and partners, for inviting us to be part of this. And I also want to applaud President Ruto for this very critical initiative about green industrialization in Africa. And I think he's really doing well. And I also want to use the opportunity to acknowledge one of my board members, James, here. Just let me say that, transitioning to green industrialization, right, it's not only energy. We've been emphasizing energy as the foundation for the green industrialization, but it also involves other processes, biological, chemical, things that touches on deforestation and others. And so we have to see a more comprehensive engagement. And for financial institutions, let me just cite 3 things that they want to see. Having said that, because of this comprehensive financial analysis, right, if you are evaluating an investment, you are not only looking at the energy, but you are looking at the whole processes, right? So whether it's a green industrial project or even investment in a company that is doing a green investment, the fundamental research or the project analysis will be the same, right? The metrics that you use, like the net present value, the internal rate of return, or the debt service coverage ratio, they are the same, whether it's energy or it's green industrialization. This is why it's very, very useful that we use this green industrialization to also integrate the multilateral environment agreements. We've been focusing a lot on UNFCCC because that is where the pomps and pageantry is. Look at what we've seen. It's less the case when you go to Biodiversity Convention or the Montreal Protocol or the Minamata Convention on Mercury or the Stockholm Convention on POPs. It's different. Very, very calm. Things are done very, very calm. But with green industrial revolution, where it doesn't touch only energy, we have to see how these elements come together. And this brings me to my third on incremental cost and scale. All these, because we are charting a green path, there are incremental costs other than the business as usual, right? And so these incremental costs, there should be some way of financing this incremental cost. And that is why we don't only have to focus on the UNFCCC, but also leveraging other investments, right, from the other multilateral environment agencies in order to handle the incremental costs so that the financial viability will be much more attractive to the investors. And for that integration, I believe that some of you have been following a lot of the things that Mike Bloomberg and Mark Carney and Mary Shapiro, who are the chairs of GIN funds and co-chairs of GIN funds, and then also the vice chairs on the decarbonization and even integration of nature in transition finance, so that there is more alignment with like the biodiversity convention and other multilateral environment agreement. And that is where we really need to focus on. And we can use this green industrialization to rationalize how we approach, these multilateral environment agreements, so that the instruments that we have are not in isolation. And I will cite one example, and then I'll bring my intervention to an end. We did, when I was with AFDB, we did a project, right, where we looked at, there are a lot of incremental costs that we have to address. So we looked at how do we bring in JEF? How do we bring in SIF? How do we bring in GCF? And we're able to have a very, impactful, it's the PDAC. Any of you who want to have more information on it, you can go to the GCF website, and it's PDAC. When you go to the AFDB website, it's there. But we're able to have like a tunnel of funds, right, where this particular funds come in, and mind you, all these funds have their back end of multilateral agreement. Where these funds come in, where these funds come in. And I believe that that is the sort of things that investors who would like to see, in order to improve the financial viability of such investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. You talked about multilateral agreements, and Jean-Yves, I want to come to you. You've been spending a lot of time thinking about remaking global trade, given this quite a bit of thought. And what I want to discuss or hear from you, at least for the benefit of the audience here, is how do we get this right? How do we get this right to enable the green industrial development that we need to see?
Thank you, and apologies for running in late, but a panel I was on ran late. So let me just say, first of all, what a privilege it is to be sitting in this pavilion at this time when, for a lot of the world, especially the parts of the world that, like where I'm from, the Caribbean, Africa and its development industrial model, even if not it can't be replicated in every part of the world. I think just the fact that Africa is taking this industrial policy into its own image and likeness and exporting that confidence to the rest of the world is extremely humbling for us, but also worthy of emulation. And so I'm on this panel to learn as much as to provide my perspectives, having been on a project for the last year of thinking through how the trade system needs to actually take local solutions, absorb them into the DNA, and then come up with a way where we can begin the interface across the different regions, across the different communities, across the different regional and international organizations that form part of the multilateral trade system. I think there's a tendency to equate the multilateral trade system with the WTO, and whilst that has been a very important part of it traditionally, I think the way the world is going is to really look at how local approaches to trade, regional approaches to trade must, in a dynamic relationship, serve to also influence the way policy at the trade, the multilateral trade level is being conducted, but also to actually move beyond the WTO. So I think the number one lesson we have to learn is that there is no single approach to industrial policy. And I think in the modern lingo and even the way we talk about industrial policy in the parlance now, it's almost as if that is the preserve of bigger countries like the United States or the EU or China. When you hear about the resurgence of industrial policy, there's a tendency to go with the narrative of what is the US doing, what is the EU doing, what is China doing. And I think part of the resurgence of regional approaches to trade is that each country has its own narrative and each country has its own priority. And the real question is, what is it that the trade system can do to ensure that countries have the policy space to pursue their own industrial policies, but to do so in a way that is least restrictive and disruptive to others? And I think here the narrative from the developing world is necessarily going to be different. Because whereas a lot of the bigger countries, the industrialized countries, can afford to recoil from international trading systems in order to pursue their policies, that is simply not an option for many of us. It doesn't mean that it cannot emerge from a local circumstance, but certainly the point at which we can really leapfrog it into the international commerce and markets, that is the mediation, that is the place where the trade rules have to step in and be much more development friendly and development oriented. So I talk about a development industrial policy, not an industrial policy that recoils, but an industrial policy that actually allows countries to take what they need from the international space and then localize it again to their own development priorities. And in the case of the Caribbean, we have led some of the thinking on, through the Bridgetown Initiative, the international finance space. What we're doing with the VLAR framework is to take that model of reform and make it relevant to the international trade space. And so we have come up with, I would say, about 10 different areas, and I won't regale you with all of them. They're actually in my possession if you want to see. But one of the main areas has to be the subsidies, and thinking much more broadly about how the WTO and trade rules treat subsidies. Under the current rules, a subsidy is illegal only if it is trade distortive. We live in a sustainable world where we're moving towards sustainability priorities. So how do we actually encourage those subsidies that encourage sustainable outcomes while penalizing or disincentivizing those subsidies that actually neither promote trade outcomes nor sustainability outcomes? So one of the first things we do is to round off that framework that looks at not just the trade impact of subsidies, but also the sustainable impacts. And there are obvious candidates that under our framework would be confined to the dustbin of history: fossil fuel subsidies, certain types of fisheries subsidies, which the WTO has begun to embark on reforming. But even agricultural subsidies, those that promote sort of multinational approaches to increasing agricultural production in not very sustainable ways, while ignoring the food security problems that our countries face. How do we take that financing and repurpose it to fund the equitable transition that we're talking about? Because for the countries of our parts of the world to be part of a sustainable economy, we need to be able to measure our sustainable practices, whether that's carbon, labor, how we fish, how we plant things in order to enter these global value chains. But we also need to comply with the very standards that international and developed countries impose on us. So how do we think about repurposing? It's really about that transfer of wealth, that the trade system now needs to not just create the rules, but step in and show and lead the way how the transfer of wealth necessary for countries like ours to participate in the global value chains, where we can actually eke out a commercial advantage for ourselves and not just wait on handouts and wait on grants. So I think it's a whole ecosystem change. I mentioned subsidies, I mentioned standards, but there's also access to green goods and services that we produce. How do we negotiate these types of rules that incentivize our SMEs, our women-led organizations to be part of these global value chains where we can actually compete at the global level? And so I'll stop there, but so much that I could say, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And for the voice that you provide to represent, obviously, countries that are looking to benefit from this opportunity, and allowing that the obstacles that have been in the way, we can be able to address that, especially from a trade perspective. Envoy Ali, I want to come back to you because, there could be representatives of countries that are listening to this and looking at this opportunity and resonating with it, but then they start hearing all the things that they need to do, all the various challenges they need to overcome, and they recoil back to their old ways. What would you say? Well, how would you encourage, how would you communicate from the experience that Kenya has had, being forward-leaning in terms of what this means, not just for Kenya, but also in addressing, obviously, the question of decarbonization? How would you address a country that sort of maybe still teetering on the margins of, okay, do we do this, do we not do this? How would you encourage or at least help them in making the decision that works for them, is able to address the very needs that they're looking for?
Well, thank you again, Jack, for your good question. And in a number of countries, the developed countries, as my panel member is saying, are recoiling back, and I like the word of recoiling back to protectionism. And that is not the case of Africa. For Africa, we passed the Africa Free Trade Agreement in only 2019, and we have 54 countries so far. The 54 countries, I think 85% of those countries have already ascended to and ratified the Free Trade Agreement that we passed in 2019. The trade between Africa, amongst ourselves, was in the range of 4% over the last few years. Just because of this new FCTA agreement that we passed, last year it jumped to 17%. And we are hoping that this year it will go to beyond 30%. So that is the direction that our continent is taking. A week ago, I was in Arusha for the East Africa community. This is the most integrated community. It's about 270 million people community. And all the integration is almost being completed, including even political integration. This is the direction that Africa is taking. East Africa community, together with COMESA, which is more countries, and the SADC for the Southern African region, are already forming a tripartite agreement. I think we've concluded and signed. So the message we are passing to the rest of the world is really the issue that we are addressing, we are confronting, requires solidarity. The issue requires collaboration. The issue requires partnership. And whilst we still insist that we haven't, of course, contributed 3.9%, 4% is insignificant, even if we take 100% commitment of emission reduction. It is important that the rest of the world joins us in addressing the problem, because that is the support and the position and the ambition that the continent is providing. Allow us to support and help ourselves as a global community to address this challenge by providing fair, equitable systems of access to markets, but more importantly, of the investment, the financial resource access, which is burdening us and causing many of us really to retract and unable to address even the very basic issues of education, of health, of infrastructure, and so forth. I think that is the message that we'll continue to push for those who can help. Earthshot Africa, Europe. I think that is what we will request, that you continue to take forward the financial system, unless we really address that very critical matter of the debt situation in our continent. The whole issue of access to finance for investment, and to unpack these perceived risks that people continue to imagine of us in Africa. Unless we are able to unlock that, of course, we will take a trajectory that's not going to be helpful over long term to ourselves, but of course destructive to everybody, all humanity. And that is what Africa is saying. Let's join hands to solve this problem in solidarity.
Amen to that. Let's join hands. Wanjiru, I want you to close us out in one of the opportunities that has presented itself for us to join hands, the African Investment Earthshot. If you could just share a little bit in terms of what that opportunity means, what it is ambition and what it's looking to achieve, and one of the many ways that collaboration will help us in unlocking this opportunity.
Well, I think we've heard beautifully laid out what the demand and supply side actually call for. And I think, the point about regional markets, the AFTA, it's looking at the granularity of full implementation of the AFTA. The policy is great, but if it's not implemented fully in countries, we will not see the benefits flow. As we inch up the intra-Africa trade, the reality of trade is that it has historically been predatory. So you have countries that, yes, produce 60% of the world's cocoa or a majority of the world's bauxite, but they are playing in the commodities space and not moving up into the higher value chain. So these are the real issues of partnership, and this is why the Africa-Europe Earthshot is so important, that we begin to see each other as equal partners in trade, equal partners in developing these opportunities. Because we know, for example, for Africa, and you're so right, I think the opportunity for Africa, we are on the cusp of exciting leadership, yes, but transformation economically for our continent. But it will hang on our ability to convert these opportunities into economic gains. And everything we've talked about today is exactly what we need to do.
Yes, that deserves a round of applause. And I want to thank the Africa Investment Earthshot partners that have come together, essentially, not to just sit on the sidelines, to be able to consider how this can be achieved, providing an exemplar that we can be able to look at. And the partners represented by the Africa Europe Foundation, obviously, the Africa Investor, the BT Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and the World Resources Institute. And they've also collaborated with us, CAP A, in terms of hosting this event. I also do want to thank the Women Business for the support and for providing this room for us to have this discussion. And last but not least, the panelists, you'd agree with me, it's been an insightful discussion. So thank you so very much. And did you want to say something, Tim? Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And the conversation will continue.